Gotta fix my hair.
No, perfect. So are you at Neura or are you at UNSW or where are you at presently?
Okay, so I have a couple of paid employment positions.
Sure.
Currently, I'm doing my PhD. I finished my master's, and in fact, I ended up doing two masters, a coursework and a master's in philosophy. And then I ended up submitting a thesis for each. So I got two awarded theses so far in neuroscience. I worked on the infant brain. Also, now I'm doing my PhD again in neuroscience, and I'm working as a respiratory scientist at Westmead Adult Hospital and
Sure.
a technical officer at the Sydney Children's Hospital at Westmead in the respiratory lab as well.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, I have other positions as a research assistant at UNSW / Prince of Wales because they're affiliated.
Right.
And I also work for the University of Sydney where I'm doing my PhD also as a research assistant. So I know it sounds crazy, but I'm just very passionate about doing everything.
Yeah, sure. Like I think my question was going to be how many of you are doing it because it sounds like a more than a hatful. It appears that you're wearing a couple of hats. So
Yeah.
that's great. So you mentioned you're at Westmead Children's and you're at Westmead Hospital as well.
Correct. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. I don't know, like both of those buildings are super massive, like organizations in themselves as well. But the little chap, he was looked after by the neuro guys there. So, and I think even the Westmead Hospital, the good thing is that Westmead Hospital, Westmead Research Institute, and the CMRI, they're just like, and there's a bit of an overlap between staff between the organizations. So it's good that way, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But you mentioned that like for your PhD, you're at the Randwick Children's as well?
No, for my PhD, I'm at the University of Sydney,
Okay.
specifically at the Brain and Mind Centre, if you've heard of it,
Right.
you know where it is.
Sure.
But then also through my PhD, because I see now I'm moved on from laboratory infant research to clinical research. So I see patients across various hospitals, including Prince of Wales and the Lifehouse, which is considered a part of RPA hospital. Yeah, so it's just like everywhere.
Yeah. No, certainly. Thanks so much for sharing your multiple hats. Briefly, just I wanted to check that, like, would you have had an opportunity to look at the video, listen to the podcast?
Yes. I wasn't aware that there was a podcast, but I was on the page just reading on the events and your story and Kush's story. And yeah, you've had a couple of videos, short 5-minute videos, which I've gone through.
Sure.
All very interesting and
Yeah.
informing. Yeah.
No. Thanks for saying that. There's also a link to a research podcast. Like a researcher, what he did was he managed to speak to us, but he managed to speak to a couple of research labs in the US and the UK. And so after this call, I'll certainly send you a link to that.
Of
It's a
course.
10-minute podcast, but he's like, um, me as a parent, like I was fascinated by, I was working in IT before, now I'm working in finance, like in IT and in finance, the advances in technology just are helping so many good things like analytics and understanding and all. But when you um, apply all of those learnings into like, the advances in robotics for genomics and all that, and like advances in nanotechnology for and CRISPR and things, and analysis around those. They were very exciting to me. But the way this researcher shared the story around researchers in the UK working with transparent jellyfish and like implanting them with markers that glow blue or red in the brains when certain pharmaceutical drugs are delivered. So it's super fascinating how complex, involved, and advanced research is.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole world of neuroscience is just massive. And like now I've done 2 masters in neuroscience and now PhD, and I still don't know, a fraction of
Yeah.
it's, I mean, all I know is a little bit, a fraction of what's the diseases are there and conditions and syndromes. So
Mm.
including the FOXG1 syndrome, I did not know about it until I applied for this
Mm.
position. And I was just so fascinated by everything that you've shared. And yeah, it's very interesting. It's definitely something that's very interesting and needs a lot more attention.
Yeah. And the other thing we were trying to do was certainly, like, those wins around SMA and wins around, I think, even Candid disease and stuff. Like, there's lots of promises. In fact, we had a call earlier this week where a couple of researchers, one of the researchers at UQ, she was sharing, she's working in a M&D uh, clinical research laboratory. They have a team of about 20 odd people, and they're trying to look at repurposing old drugs to um, help with the M&D journey, and things like something like M&D, even SMA and stuff, like they're so um, scary diagnosis.
Of
And
course.
the first time we met Dr. Webster at Westmead Children's, he said that, oh, like, he's got a slight abnormality in his brain, like agenesis of the corpus callosum, and, like, the myelination is not progressing as per speed. So, like, my first interpretation was, okay, that's fine. People progress slowly, so it should be okay. If you've got one finger that's shorter, it wouldn't matter that much. But then, like, later on, it just took us a long time to realize that, wow, he's been hit by the hammer, and, like, he's been, like, it's so profoundly impacted. So but at the same time, the underlying um mechanism just being that one broken gene, if repaired, it should the rescue whatever happens. Otherwise, even, like, if we don't get 100% good outcome for Kush, at least awareness and reducing suffering for the people, earlier intervention, earlier treatments, earlier switch on to anti-epileptics and all would benefit massively. He was at the Westby Children's. He was at the city ward for almost about a year when he was
Yeah.
small. And so, but now that's good. Um, so maybe my first question to you after this would be that, like, do you reckon that you would have capacity? I'm sure interest would be without a question, that you've got super massive interest. Would you have capacity to maybe support us, help us?
Of course, of course. I mean, if I didn't, I wouldn't have gone out of my way to look for volunteering opportunities. And this is something that I've done since I was in year 9. I think I started hospital volunteering.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I've always volunteered somewhere,
Mhm.
and I've got a very extensive and diverse, especially volunteering background. So I feel like it's time for me to, with the experience and the skills that I have, it's time for me to progress into more challenging roles and just challenge myself and also use my skills to, for a good, kind of reason that has a bigger impact.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question, yes, I definitely do, and I'm so excited.
And I was just trying to, like, as you're speaking, quickly see if I could bring up your LinkedIn. But what is your experience? The only reason I ask is um, because, like, it'd be good to see what is the best way you could. Uh, I can't, maybe, apologies, I couldn't look it up, but would you mind sharing 2 minutes of your holiday journeys? What all did you uh, have, and, like, what all did you like about those experiences that you had since you're 9 onwards?
that I've had. Oh, okay. So, okay. So first of all, just about the LinkedIn. I used to have LinkedIn,
Oh, okay.
but I just got rid of it because I felt like I wasn't using it a lot. And yeah, so but I'm happy to put on another profile if it
Mhm.
helps to, kind of
Yeah,
everything
share the
out
word out
there.
there.
Yeah. So Okay, so my ultimate goal is to become a medical doctor, and I've always wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And so I've had this interest for as long as I can remember. And I love working at a hospital. I love being at the hospital, other than being a patient. So I've just took that pathway since I was, as soon as I could be, qualified for like volunteering and, just being out there. And I started that, I started that journey and I just kept volunteering. Not all in the hospital. Like I've done some like primary school tutoring, like after school tutoring, volunteering. I've done fundraising, and just like one-off events, as well as long term. It's something that interests me, especially volunteering, because I get to give back and just connect with people and be inspired by a lot of people who like, because I feel when I volunteer, then I'm meeting people from diverse backgrounds, rather than if I'm, let's say, now a respiratory scientist and I'm working in the respiratory field, everyone there is a respiratory specialist in one way or the other. So volunteering brings a different kind of experience and different kind of exposure, which I've always been interested in. And I also get a lot of skills from it. And I've developed a lot in terms of, even just communication skills. So I just continued that way for years now. I'm always like, as soon as one volunteering opportunity ends, I'm looking into the next one. It's just,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, like as somebody who's trying to get people to help me help my son and help everybody else, I try to almost, it would be unfair for me to say that, hey, like if you volunteer, like, rather than giving, it's you gain a lot of, uh, satisfaction. And like, as you said, like the skills around like speaking in things, and like the more you develop as a person, the more valuable you're to like society, but to yourselves and things as well. When I was in a position of like, looking for additional team members in our team, so like I would say like there's two resumes, one's with volunteered, and like so obviously they've got a much wider exposure, experience, interest, and like generally those life runs on the board.
Of
So
course. Yeah.
thank you for that. But again, like, I'm sure if I say, hey, if you volunteer for us and like it'll be good for you, it appears to me to be a sales pitch, which
It's a two-way
yeah,
street. Yeah,
it
absolutely.
is. Yeah. Um, certainly. What we'll do next is like certainly I'll add you to the system, create an ID, have you join in, do create your LinkedIn profile again if you can, and like say that like volunteering with us and helping us. In terms of the actual pathway itself, or actual the impact itself, what I was trying to do was I can share after this. Okay. Um, you would be super keen to join the board as well, yeah? You wanted to be a board member. Sure. That's fantastic. We have in the past we've had a little bit of a challenge with continuity, in the sense that people come and then like things happen, life happens, and 6 months later like we take a different change of direction, and things don't work out. Have you been a board member on other boards?
Unfortunately not.
No. Right.
But I have been, in terms of leadership skills, I
Yes.
have done some TAFE certification in leadership and management,
Right.
to get, like a formal certification out of it. But other than that, I do have leadership. I've stepped into management, again, not formally because I don't have like that formal position, but
Yep.
I've co-managed with my managers and helped them to manage the department.
Yep.
I've led teams, trained people,
Yeah. Yeah.
PhD. Yeah.
Yeah. You still doing your PhD? When
Yes,
you how much are you into it, and like when do you
I'm
uh
only first year in.
let's say, all right, yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's the subject that you, or what's the topic of your PhD? Please.
So we're looking at chemotherapy-induced nerve damage.
Sure.
specifically the peripheral nerves. So there are some cytotoxic medications that induce nerve damage, and there are different mechanisms that happen, but mainly these medications target the axons, and that way the nerve progressively dies. So we're looking at this. We've got two cohorts. We've got cross-sectional, and we've got prospective patients that we follow across multiple time points. And we mainly focus on symptom progression. And so we recruit these patients who are on these neuropathy-inducing drugs, cancer patients, and we put them in our studies, and either we test them at one point, that's for the cross-sectional, see whether they develop symptoms and how severe they are, or prospectively, which is baseline before the treatment, interim in the middle of the treatment, and then at the end of the treatment, and then we follow them up for different time points up to 2 years post-treatment. And so our testing is quite extensive, because we spend about 1.5 hours to 2 hours with the patients. We do functional testing, nerve excitability, nerve conduction studies, and we administer questionnaires. And so we collect a lot of data and we publish it.
No, certainly.
Yeah.
You know, it'll be, I'm sure, like once Tanya has managed to have a look and listen and read through this, she'll be super excited, because, you know, her organization is working at formulating cognition tests or testing mechanisms, delivering them via digital mechanisms or traditional mechanisms, and working with I think she mentioned clinical trials and things where, you know, what are the outcomes and how are patients impacted. I think from a cognition perspective, but like I think what you're saying is from an impact perspective or from a deterioration perspective. And like, so your cohort is not specifically pediatric, but it could be pediatric, midlife, early, late life, across the spectrum. Yeah.
It is, yeah. So I have my colleague who's a research officer is looking at pediatric cancers, hematological cancers specifically, and adults. But my project focuses on adults only.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So far, at least, I don't know. Yeah, yeah, but it's all very interesting, and there's a lot to be done. Yeah.
So let me talk about, you know, from specifically your interest towards joining the board, and specifically then about maybe our focus areas, and like, you know, this is, again, I'm sure you've got the discipline of putting all of the contents together and literature together, and like documenting and putting this together. I have been a very poor leader, and like that's why I need a lot of help around, like, you know, building these tools and things. And like we've over the past 6 years, 7 years done Bunnings barbecues, raised money, given it to a PhD candidate, and like led them to the research. But we've been unsuccessful in, like, you know, developing those larger knowledge areas around, like if we have a list of neurologists, pediatricians, and like, you know, giving them a bit of a questionnaire around or information advocacy around FOXP1 and all, we haven't been able to do that. So those could be one of those deliverable outcomes that, like, you know, even if you join the board in whatever capacity, if you could maybe have that as one of the focus areas for yourself, or driving work around driving improvements and outcomes around that specific area. That was one thing. The second piece we wanted to do was, I've been working with or I've been in touch with this guy. His name is Stephen Kingsmore. Dr. Stephen Kingsmore is at Rady Children's. He is pretty much, I think, one of the pioneers in rapid whole genome sequencing for early NICU, PQ, pediatric intensive cares. So with advances in genetic medicine, with there's a possibility of, like, you know, an early capture of a diagnosis. As soon as kids are presented, they could have certainly very good outcomes. And as the knowledge around genetics and the whole understanding around genetics is expanding, that's a very promising piece. So like what I was saying to him was that please include FOXP1 into your deck or into your playbook, because FOXY1 is already included in, like, you'd be surprised, like neurological, um, so many, like in the microcephaly panel, in the dystonia panel, in the in the I think a couple of Rett syndrome or epilepsy panels, it is included. It's tested for. So and as you know, sometimes rare diseases is, you would imagine that the cohort, the target population is tiny, but because the severity is so profound, and it is one of the gene therapy companies, Taysha GTX in the US. They have picked it up uh, in their pipeline, in their research delivery pipeline. So they're working towards a cure for this. So they picked this up as one of the 17 central nervous system monogenic disorders that they're working towards. And like what is interesting is the incidence that they are using in their studies is almost the same as red. So they're saying that globally there's about a cohort of 100,000 people. Um, that being said, what I mean is, if a drug is developed, then like the potential target market is 100,000 people. So on the other, like PubMed and stuff, and like as research, there's always those delays around data gathering, data capture, and publishing. It is, I think, in the general domain, the perception is that, oh, there's only 1,000 kids, so like it's a very small population. But if we work with people like Stephen King's book, Rally Children, to include the FOXP1 in post-birth early diagnosis, and then sequentially bring it forwards to non-invasive prenatal testing, 10 weeks fetus. Certain conditions are tested for, but not everything. They should be expanded. And then the third thing being, even just before the baby journey starts, preconception genetic screening is not a bad idea, because Mendelian disorders should be stopped. Like if you know that you're going to be hit by the bus, you just, if there's a red light, you just wait for the light to turn
Exactly.
green. So it is a no-brainer.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was just going to just add in a comment just to your previous comment, I guess, about raising awareness and creating events. So as I was going through the foundation's webpage, I noticed that there are no upcoming events. I don't know if that's just haven't been incorporated and the page hasn't been updated, or there's nothing upcoming. So yeah, in my head, I was thinking maybe we can start to, just create these fundraiser events, or just to raise awareness, or just to maybe create more pages, or even brochures that we can distribute in like maternity wards, or educate nursing students and midwifery students, so that they're aware of this later, early on into their career. I don't know if they have lectures on like FOXG1 syndromes and the like, but yeah, it is a very rare disorder. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't. So that's something to look into, if that's the
um
case.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know I'm conscious of time. We're just hitting the 30-minute mark. Would you have another 10 minutes after this?
Of course, my
Okay.
shift starts at 6, so we've got half
Okay.
an hour.
Sure. Let me take 10 minutes. Like what I'll do is I'll share my screen, and like this is something like as Tanya has come on very recently as well. I wanted to share her with her as well, but like I'll share this with yourself around what we have done. And like, you're absolutely right in the sense that like, absolutely we should, at least somebody says, what do I do or where do I go? They can at least book their calendar. Okay, like next Saturday there's something, or the uh, November is Foxy Venice month, or like I need to get enrolled for this run or whatever event. So like we should do that. Let me just very briefly share my screen, and let me let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
So this is like an intranet, and like this is something that we shared. Maybe I think this is like I'll try playing this. See if um uh, I've got to do and then let's see. So we've done park runs. We've been to many motorcycle rides, pink ribbon ride, multiple years, Fox Given Awareness rides.
Sydney Santa rides, Cobb's Cruiser rides, and Bikers Australia rides. The car shows, we've done so many car shows, one, two, three, four, five. We've done Cars Under the Stars, we've done it in multiple years and multiple months. Harry's Liverpool, end of the month meet, we've done it for multiple years, multiple months. Sydney Cars and Coffee, it's been a big show. So, awareness perspective, we have done a lot of things.
I just pause there. Maybe I'll stop that. I'll share this link to this clip, the longer clip later. But what I was trying to say is some of these guys, like, when early on in our journey, and most, 9 times out of 10, you meet people and they say, how can I help? And so some of these guys, like the guys who run the car shows, they're like 1,000 cars come to his car show every once a month, and like it's happening in Western Sydney, and he has 30,000 people on his page, and if there's 500 cars, four people per car, and like we can have a stall, and so and the challenge being pre-pandemic, we were trying to look for those opportunities and physically connecting and going and meeting people. And these are still, just for the lack of resources, just because we don't have capacity, interest, or volunteers to be able to set up a stall there. But if we have five people who say yes, like this weekend, I'll help you for 2 hours,
Yeah,
then we can get we have a lot of goodwill in the um, in the community who people ask, if we were to say that, hey, give us a table, and we just want to be there with a donation box and a pamphlet and a information session. So we just talk to people and tell them what we're doing.
yeah,
And I was speaking to, there's another super young volunteer at um, uh, Sydney Uni. She's I think um, I'll have to double check on the fact, but even when kids enrolled, I was at UTS, the first introduction to the university, you've got those clubs and desks, and you've got those social groups. So we
yeah,
can have those kinds of presence, and to the extent that even the video that you watched, that was made by second year media studies students at UNSW. They said that, oh, we've got to be doing our semester, and we've got to make a submission, as we've got to, this is we've got to what if a coursework to be done, and so can we do this? And like we said, yeah, fantastic, it'll be great help. So if we
that's
engage with people, yes, certainly, neuro, certainly, uh, form bio, certainly, um, um, even other areas. If we have like three volunteers who are marketing or um, media studies, or even if it's multicultural groups, that'll be so good to get the message out there.
absolutely. And I just from like just a general comment for volunteering in general, I know that a lot of young people are happy to volunteer in whatever, especially if they don't have experience and they need that experience to find a job, or just work in whatever field, or get study the field. I was one of them who, before I even get a job, I'm just, just hungry for the experience. And I would go out there and do whatever, like if it's a 1 day event, if it's 6 months, 3 months, I just took whatever I could get. And so I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people like that. So considering that we're looking, or that the foundation is very diverse, and it seeks that help from even media students, there's no doubt that we'll be able to find people who are willing to help from across the board, I guess.
Certainly, yeah, no, I think we should try to certainly get as much interest as we can for our volunteer group. And the challenge here, I would say to you, is that you know the challenge here would be to turn the volunteering engagement and enthusiasm that you have a little bit around its head, in the sense that now it's not you're here as a volunteer, but then you're here as one of the leaders who's trying to engage volunteers and keep them busy, committed. And so if you have five people who say, hey, Masarra, what do I do? And then I think the why is clear, the what is sometimes what we struggle with. That
Yeah.
okay, what do we make happen? And so that's and obviously all working towards that final goal of a cure, but even if not a cure, or prevention. So like prevention is as good as a cure, or even better maybe.
Of course, something like a biomarker, to help with like, early diagnosis or early
Yeah.
interventions that, yeah.
Brilliant. No, it's fascinating. Super. Thank you for
Yeah, thank
your
you so much.
time and interest. Uh, was a specific queries question? Like maybe let me share that in the past, what we've done is with um, volunteers, we definitely want you to come on board and like help and like take your time, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But certainly with board members, what we've said is definitely most certainly need keen, eager, passionate, hungry board members to join us. Um, Sometimes people have a perspective of a board position being, once every 2 months you meet for half an hour or something. I was on some of those boards, and but this one I would challenge you to think of this to be more of an operational, uh, have an operational element on the board role as well. So like if you do join the board, we need to do a lot of work around like, building up a SAB, advertising for small grants, pitching for the next PhD. It's been paused for a little bit. There's been challenges, and take those things forward, and like advocacy areas where we um, work with state, federal, pharmaceutical, diagnostic companies, and say that help us building relationships and all.
Yeah.
And so lots to be done, but I take it that like like I maybe my strength is not in not everywhere. So like whatever my strength is, I'll focus on that. Like I want to like reinstart those, if we have a little bit of confidence around, can we go to the next month's meet, and like, can we plan ahead, plan a calendar ahead? Um, as you
Yeah.
said, having no future events is not a good look.
I mean, it is very challenging, especially with the pandemic. So yeah, I doubt that someone would look at it as as a
Oh,
downside or a negative, but it's good to have that constant dynamic kind of
yeah,
just nature going on. I guess just to keep reminding people that this syndrome exists and we need to do something about it.
sure. No, certainly makes a massive sense. Um, I'd encourage you, like, next steps. I can have you added on onto the uh, volunteer database and volunteer list, onto a research database as well. We try to meet once a week, Mondays 8 p.m. And if Monday 8 p.m. You connect with the other cohort and see what and how we can do work things out.
Yeah.
From there, if you're okay, what we'll do is I'd be super keen for you to like say take it as a 4 to 8 week, 12-week trial. See if this is something that like clicks. Is something that works for yourselves. If you say like 4 weeks later, 8 weeks later, that hey, like this is not definitely, let's progress to joining the board, we'd be super happy to have you on board. I just don't want to like take the first step, get everything done, and then like 3 months later get unwind everything. So
Yeah, that's totally fair enough. I understand that we haven't worked together, and you don't want to just get too move too forward too fast. Yeah, but I'm telling you now, unless I'm disabled or dead by then, I would not back down, knowing how my interests and how I've been working on this time and volunteering. I'm very committed to my work. But yeah, I was just, I had a question. So whenever you're ready for question times, I guess.
yes, yeah. No, like I
Um,
think that now should be good for 5 questions from you.
yeah,
Probably two or
awesome.
three. Yep.
Yeah, so the position that was advertised, it was director/board member.
Mhm.
that mean, because I've looked through the board members and the people who have the like two titles put together, I'm assuming that would be like the two positions put together, or how would that, like,
Sure.
moving forward, how would the recruitment?
Yeah, no, certainly. In the nonprofit space, we've got like the structure of the organization is like we've got a board that decides what the organization does, and then we've got the volunteers, all being voluntary roles. So the board members generally, like, typically are the ultimate responsible people. So from an ACNC's perspective, from the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission's perspective, if they were to say that who is managing this organization, it's the board members who are doing it. Now, when you say because our the way our charity is incorporated, it's a company limited by guarantee of $10. So if company's got a liability, to the extent that your personal liability is going to be capped at $10, no more than that. And but the corporate structure, a board member is a director. So the three key roles for directors is chairperson, treasurer, and secretary, and then you can have general board members. Then, so if you join the board and the directorship is joined, is the same, is one and the same. You could, I'll share a link to ACNC around info, but I would definitely, send after this conversation, an email to the board member saying that, hey, like I've spoken to Masarra, this is fantastic, she's keen. Can we consider joining? Like, does everybody agree? Given that it's such a small organization, and given we've had problems with engagement, I'd say to everybody, yes, yes, yes. So everybody would like they've got they're individually entitled to share an opinion. Like once we achieve consensus, and then we bring you on board. Once you're a director, you are then on the director or on the ACNC portal as a responsible person for the charity.
Awesome. Excellent. That sounds all very interesting. I had another question. So the main source of funding, I'm assuming it's through fundraising and donations, or do you have any government grants going on for the research?
No. So you coming in, you're bringing all your money to the. I'm kidding. But as board members, as board members, we would encourage all board members to be very responsible towards enhancing the board, the fundraising aspects of it, be involved there as well. But you're right, we've been relying on grassroots fundraising. We've had if we had volunteers who would go for the city to serve, we would say, hey, Ellie's running, so please support her, and so we raise funds that ways. We don't have a funding. We don't have a lot of money. We're sitting at on about 100K, close to what we need for a PhD candidate. But I think since we finished the first PhD, I think we want to target shorter, like say 2K, 5K grants for someone in a personal capacity, in a professional capacity like yourselves, or if we speak to people who are in the Brain Mind Center, who are on Neura and stuff, and say, hey, can you, if you got a master's, honors, PhD candidate, postdoc working on a specific thing, can you let them work for 6 months on a specific outcome for us?
Yeah.
So we have money, we have a little bit of money, but I think more than that, we would love to raise millions and billions and make everything happen yesterday, but that's not a limiting factor. At the same time, I would encourage everybody to try putting in, even if it's 1% of your
Exactly. Absolutely. Because that's another thing I was thinking about, given that I am in the research field and I already have a higher degree by research master's, and okay, even a PhD, this is specifically for applying for government grants. The organizations limit PhD students to apply directly and give them a grant. So we have to always go through our supervisors. Yes. But in saying that, I have contributed to applying to 2 research grants, which were successful. So of course, my supervisor have done majority of the work. So I give her credit for that. But I just want to highlight the fact that I do have some background knowledge on how the grant application works and
Sure.
writing for a grant.
This is NHMRC or like this is MWRF or
And one of them is an NHMRC grant.
okay.
The other one is through, I think, the cancer pain partners, something
Sure.
like that, an organization.
And I think like as a nonprofit, we could like as our volunteers they could apply for NHMRCs and could put submissions there. But because of the competitive nature and because you're competing against like hospitals and like super established organizations, chances are low for us. But at the same time, we can so for instance, like the Movember people, they're sitting on like $90 million in their bank, and so we should say to them like, give us we've got to so put a application to them and say. And I know like the chaps who like Mark Hauer, who was one of the massive contributors towards the Movember and the Distinguished Gentleman's Right grants. They we at least have an ear to them to say that like what we're doing is we don't want to like go and like paint a mural on the side of a wall. We just actually want real researchers to do some real work to progress, change lives for our generations, our future generations, and everyone.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, and we definitely can start that. Yeah, I mean, even with just basic knowledge, we can just build on that. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure other board members have other experience in research, and we can all put it together and hopefully get or work towards getting a government grant for research, and it will look very good and it will help researchers in all aspects.
yeah,
So yeah, that's something that I've had in mind as well.
certainly like that would be. And like as you would understand, like it's a super long process. Yeah, it's like not an easy.
Very hard too.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean,
it's
nothing's
a good
impossible.
strength. Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
like the other perspective I would let you keep in mind when you're coming along or joining us is like if for the board member role, try we'll have ups and downs. Try keeping a commitment of say the next 12 months or so. Yeah, like so at least minimum. And like we would love to have you for 100 years. But um, the, given if you keep a little bit of a broader spectrum in mind, then perspectives sometimes change. We're not in a hurry, but we're not. If things don't work out tomorrow, day after, it's not the last day.
yeah.
Sorry, I am answering the questions very in a very linear manner, but like you had another question.
Yeah, no. Yeah, this is pretty much. I had other questions, but they were kind of answered throughout the conversation that we had. So this is pretty much all my questions for now.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I was happy to know that you're working at UNSW with is it Dr. Fabian?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Do you know
yeah,
him?
I mean, I don't know him, but I just started working there. So it's like, oh, UNSW. I haven't worked at Macquarie, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it was
I
just
think Fabian Delero and like Lars, the Dementia Research Center head, they moved from actually UCID to UNSW and now to Macquarie. So they're now at Macquarie.
they always move around. We've
Yeah.
had big researchers. I don't know if you've heard of Glenda Halliday. She specializes in dementia and specifically Parkinson's research. And also my boss, Professor Matthew Keenan, who's directing the Bread and Mind Center, who is
Wow.
looking at M&D research.
Mhm.
They both were at UNSW and then they moved to Sydney Uni.
Yeah.
So I don't know. They just move around all the time. But
Sure.
yeah.
And certainly your networks within the Brain and Mind Center and like within you said your academic engagement, but your professional clinical engagements as well, and your network and outreach would be massively helpful in terms of um, sharing the message for us, but also letting the other people know about something that else out on the horizon as well.
Of course, of course. Yeah. Yeah,
One
that's
thing
oh yeah.
before I forget, just I wanted to, like say that if you could try having a little bit of white space in your calendar. So even if it's like 1 or 2 hours during the week, but a little bit of a, besides the, the meetings and all that we have, like if you are able to keep some um, dedicated white space in terms of like even progressing little steps, because sometimes, we get so busy with life and like suddenly it's 36 months and like we don't know where the time's gone. So
Yeah.
uh,
No,
that
of course.
would be
Yeah.
appreciated.
Of
And,
course. Yeah.
and you're able to do that, yeah.
Of course, yeah. I was just going to say, if I had all this planned beforehand, and I made sure that I'm able to dedicate some time, because it's not like I'm applying for like a one-time event. Yeah, so I'm aware of the commitments, and I know that it's a long-term commitment as well. And yeah, I've had it already. So like I said, unless something unexpected happens, which I will obviously communicate that. But yeah, so far it's all good on my end.
Whereabouts do you live in Sydney?
Liverpool,
Liverpool, all right. Okay.
Liverpool, Lernia region.
All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. No, that's great. I was trying to help out Scott Morrison from Fairfield, so like not too far from where you're. So
Okay,
the
interesting.
predilections. I think Scott Morrison, when he was a treasurer, like he announced 500 million towards gene therapy research, towards MRRF, and towards progressing. I think one of the things super essential for anything is money. So if we have
Of
good
course.
management of monies, then like if we have surpluses, then we can invest in, because these are aspirational projects. Like, if we run out of money, the first thing that stops is research. The second thing that stops is like the trains and police stations will be the last thing to stop. All of the good things are that what get chopped off first.
Yeah, no, especially research. I know money is important. It's an important element for like, everywhere, especially these days, but specifically research. I've realized that money could make or break a research. You can have all the qualified people, you can have all the experience, and you could even have a space in like a hospital or a lab, but if you don't have funding, it's a very slow progress,
Sure.
very slow, and yeah, a bumpy ride.
And like even that, as you mentioned, space in a hospital, space in a lab, it's takes and like that, that's why we were grateful. We've funded APA scholarships, but finding a PI who's got capacity, finding a university that's got uh, an appetite for taking on a position, then we give them $30,000 a year for the PhD candidate or thereabouts. But the PhD candidate then uses another $100,000 worth of equipment, apparatus, environment, infrastructure, and everything else to then really start their
Yeah.
processes. And so, yes, we are super fortunate to have a great infrastructure. Um, they could, the more we have, the better it could be, faster it would be, but certainly massively appreciative of all of those things. Do you work with animals as well?
No,
No. Okay.
but just as a part of my previous master's project, we were troubleshooting. We were getting unexpected results, working on the infant brain. So to troubleshoot, we branched out to the piglet and the mouse brain.
Sure.
And so that was, yeah, as a way to troubleshoot what was going on. But my main focus was human brain.
Not primates, mouse and piglets. Yeah.
No,
And
I
even
know that you do mouse studies.
sorry?
I know that you do mouse studies, or
Yeah.
you focus on.
Yeah. But I think even I, as a non-scientist, like I might say the wrong things, but like um uh uh Lashek, who is at CMRI, he's working at he's working on generating a vector delivery mechanism, and so he was mentioning that even primates, when primates get involved, it's super complex and it's difficult and challenging and like long term, because if you want to see an impact at a human stage, then how do you get to that? And it is super. I think people don't realize what all goes behind closed doors in terms of research, in terms of team work involved. I was at Society for Neuroscience a few years ago, and like one poster might be 5 years of work, or like 3 years of work, or 2 years of work.
Of course. And this is a topic that I can relate to, being a researcher myself. Publications take a long time. I've been working on simultaneously at 3 publications, but it's been about a year and a half, and then just today the one of the projects was ready for publication, so we sent it off to the journal, my previous supervisor and I. So yeah, it just, again, it takes a lot of work, and behind closed doors, as you said, it's a lot of time, work, and effort, and
And
yeah,
once you
there's-
hit send, even after that, it's you waiting. Yeah. Mhm.
of course, then it gets reviewed and we get to deal with the feedback, and it's a long, lengthy process, but I guess it's all worth it at the end.
Sarah, let me do a couple of things as next steps, like, get you on board, get you, send off an email to Tanya. She'll reach out to yourself, have a quick call, work out the specifics and details. And Monday, 8 p.m., if you can join, you might, I'm happy for your email to be included in there, but like, if you're able to, we've got a Masarra at fox31 .org.au. We'll set up an email, and then you can get access to resources and things. So use that as primary.
Of course, yeah, of course. That sounds very exciting.
I know you've got a 6, so cautious of your time. And it's been super lovely, amazing to speak to you. Would be looking forward, and would be great to have you. And let's take it in a phased engagement manner. Like first phase, like see how things work out. Let's say give it 4, 8, 12 weeks, and like no issues. Like you're happy to have you on board.
Awesome. Lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for organizing this and for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.